men and women that are in first responder communities, we need their marriages to be good. We need their mental health to be good. We need their kids to be in a good place.
Everybody, Doc Brian here, and welcome to Doc Talks. We talk about people's troubles, trials, tribulations, and hopefully triumphs in life. We're in LifeWord Studios today, broadcasting in over 150 languages to 127 countries to a potential listening audience of 2 billion people. You can check out all of our content at lifeword.org. That's lifeword.org. Today we have with us Rick Stapleton, or I should say Captain Stapleton, I guess, with Conway Fire Department. He's one of my men's groups here in Conway. And Rick, just thank you for being willing to sit down and have a conversation today.
Oh, absolutely, man. I'm honored and a little humbled to even be asked.
So how long have you been with the fire department, or even in, let's say, within a first responder type role?
So I've been with Conway Fire Department for 19 years, a little over 19 years, and that's before this. I worked for Conway Corporation here in town, doing the water and sewer systems here in town, and so I've kind of always been on call, I guess, but yeah, I've been doing this for Conway Fire Department for about 19 years.
Yeah. So if you look back on your 19 years of being at Conway Fire Department, what would you say was your heyday, the best moment that has ever happened within those 19 years?
Getting to look into somebody's face whenever you've been able to make a true difference in their life.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that there's one like specific particular time, but from a career standpoint anyways, whenever you can see that relief on somebody's face, or you can see that, sometimes you do all the right things and you do everything that you can do, and it's just not that day, But then there's times to where, you can even through those hard times, whenever you can help give somebody some comfort in their time of need or sorrow, those are like you can see though over time, like you've gotten to where you can recognize those times in people's lives, and then there's times to where things work out and it all is great, and you get to meet those people that you have either, people that have been in cardiac arrest or things like, and you get to meet them later, and they're getting to continue their life and through, God's will, like you've been able to help. Like, obviously those are great times. But I don't know that there's just like one specific instance career wise, obviously birth of your kids and all those kind of things are different. But from a career standpoint, I'm not sure that there's one particular accolade or time that I can really put my finger on that, like, this was, the best day, or, I don't know.
Now, if I said, what was the worst day ever, could you pinpoint one thing without telling us what that worst day ever was? Is there one thing that immediately comes to mind?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. There's definitely those things that you can't forget.
Yeah.
And
so I did all of that to say that when people who are in first responder positions, whether it be police, fire, EMS, even in dispatch, because they're kind of the unsung heroes of logistics, that we kind of see so much that we capitalize on the bad instead of the good. We can pinpoint that one issue. And I'm sure, which we're close enough to Valonia here, I'm sure that you have responded for mutual aid in tornadoes and other, you have Interstate 40 running right down the middle of you. So, major wrecks and accidents, not just on the interstate, but also in the city, I'm sure. But in my experience, other than tornadoes and natural disasters, one of the worst things that ever happens to a family is a house fire, where they lose everything. So as a fireman, how does that impact you and the job that you're trying to do there on site when you do have a family that wants to get in to try to save certain things where it's not safe, how does that affect you, not just physically of doing your job, but emotionally?
So it's kind of crazy you'd ask that because when I was in sixth grade, my family actually had a house fire.
Oh, wow.
That at the time my dad was working out of town, and it was just me and one of my brothers and my mom at home, and it was in the middle of the night. And so I've been through that side of having to, try to get out and break out windows and all that thing, even being at a young age, but now doing it from the other side and having been through that, it gives me maybe a different level of empathy for people whenever we have that happen. And people, if you've never been through that, they have no idea what's coming the days and weeks, after that happens, and dealing with insurance and all of the things and where am I going to stay? And I have nothing, because even the things that we were able to salvage, everything is smoke filled and stinks and it stains. And, there's all the things that have to happen before you can just let them take all this stuff.
Right.
And so, if you don't have a heart for people, you're not going to be a very good first responder.
Yeah.
And so, knowing all the things that they have to go through to recover their things and try to salvage things, things that we see as being unsalvageable, you may look at and be like, hey, that is a treasure in my life. That was my grandfather's whatever. That was my dad's something. And you'll take it and try to restore it to the best that you can. And we look at it as like, oh, that's a burn up piece of whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, you look at that and you're still looking at it as something that is salvageable. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at it and you understand people's hearts and what their stuff means to them, it kind of changes how you view what you're doing whenever you go in to, try to put out a house fire or whatever. What we call salvage and overhaul part of things, it makes it so much more meaningful because you're trying to keep things from getting water damaged and smoke damaged more than what they already are, because you know that those pictures and possessions mean something to somebody. So
Yeah. Yeah, and so I mean, you made the statement as a calling, and I believe that every public service that we do has to be a calling if we're going to do it well. But then there's the other side, and I can I was a police officer in Wilmington, North Carolina for several years, and we got a call one night that there was a man on top of an apartment building on the third story, and he was going to kill himself. Well, who do we call? We call the firemen, because they're the ones that's got the big ladders and the bucket trucks, and they get me and my partner up to that. Now, I'm afraid of heights. Like, I'm afraid sitting in this chair right now. I mean, I'm afraid of heights, but we have to get up there and deal with it. And so what I hear a lot of times from first responders is that you go in, you neutralize the threat, whether that be the fire or a cardiac arrest, whatever it may be. You neutralize that threat, and then your job is over, and you're left to wonder what the outcome is. Now, in Conway, with it being not a huge metroplex here, you probably know somebody who knows somebody, but not always. What kind of impact does that leave on your mental well-being of not knowing how that actually turned out?
It's interesting you say that, because we've had this real change over the last, especially probably 5 to 7, 8 years, that, used to, we almost never knew, unless we knew somebody involved in the situation. Mm-hmm. We did not know a lot of times how those, especially medical scenarios, would play out, because, we would take them to, Conway Regional or Conway Baptist, and then they would, maybe get transferred out, or they'd sit in the ICU for days, and we would just never know unless we happened to know somebody involved in that. And just the fact of not knowing, it weighs heavy on you. Sometimes it's just a simple, if you did everything you could do. And maybe you got a heart rhythm back, but it was just long enough so that the family could come in to say goodbye to that person. Like, sometimes that's the best we can hope for.
Sure.
But when you don't even know what happened once you put them in the back of the ambulance and you close those doors and you didn't know, like though that's kind of hard to process sometimes. But now, several years ago, we got the blessing from our city council and our fire chief to start a paramedic program within Conway Fire Department. And so there were several of us, kind of one of the prouder moments of my career is knowing that I was one of the first 4 that went through the paramedic program for, Conway Fire Department. And by doing that, we gained relationships with both of our hospitals because we had to do clinical hours and ride times with our ambulance service. And we have a great relationship with our local ambulance service here, Pafford Medical Services. And so a lot of us work for them or we'll ride in with them on major calls. And we've gained relationships with all these entities so most of the time we know how the outcomes now, and it does help. It helps us to be able to reach out to families and reach out to people that we know, and and then it helps us mentally and physically know, like, hey, we did everything we could do, and sometimes it works out, and then sometimes you do everything that you can do, and you're able to do way more than I could do 15 years ago. And it's just, it just wasn't the right timing, but to know that you had all the extra training and you did everything you could do and it just wasn't time, at least you know that you kind of, you did what you knew to do.
Yeah. Well, there's something I call the shoulda, coulda, woulda. and if we're not careful, we can let those ruin our day and get into our minds. What do you tell now as a captain to some of the newer firefighters, or even command staff that are under you, about how to process what just happened and to stay away from the I should have done this or I could have done that?
Yeah. So one thing that I've really tried to implement over the last few years is to just sit down and have open and honest discussions about successes and failures. And when I say failures, things that you wish you would have seen done better on a scene, whether it was just being under control of your own emotions, staying calm so you can cognitively think through all the things that you need to do. Used to, we would come back to the firehouse and the most we talked about things were just to try to, I don't want to say make light of or joke about things, but we would sit at the kitchen table and we would talk through things, but it was very minimal of just, now I think it helps people to literally kind of work through the process of when we got on scene. What did you see? What did you smell? What did you, whatever, and work through each step through the process of that call. Because I think when you work through that, it helps you not just as a training point of maybe things that you wish you had done differently or seen differently, but also just to work through that and just kind of take each of those steps and decision-making process and just kind of work through that so it, kind of helps you digest and kind of break down that scene to know that you did what you could do while you were there.
And you're doing it aloud. You're not doing this internal dialogue of,
absolutely,
well, I should have done this or I could have done that. Because, sometimes, I hate to frame it this way, but I think you'll understand what I'm saying. Sometimes the best outcome was for them to go ahead and pass away.
Yes.
That if somebody's involved in an accident, or, on the opposite end of that, if it was somebody who had terminal cancer, they didn't have a DNR, that could have been the best possible outcome. Yeah. But even knowing that, where do we find the comfort in that?
I think the hardest part of that is, I think for me, I know where I stand spiritually.
Sure.
And so I know, and my wife and I have had this conversation on numerous occasions, and I've had this conversation with my kids. Like, I know that if for some unfortunate reason, if this job is ever the reason that, I die, and like, I'm okay with that, for the fact that I know where I'm going.
Sure.
And I think a lot of times we see the people that are the most distraught are the ones who don't have that assurance, or they're not sure. They've never thought through the whole death process, but with like what you were in reference to, most of the time, if people are wondering if they needed a DNR, if they're dealing with, stage 4 cancers or any of these, traumatic things, like some of them have already talked through that and worked through some of that. But then the ones that, the ones that are like a traffic accident that ends up, even if you were to be able to save that person for a time frame, that quality of life, is so important, and people don't always think about that until you're in that situation, maybe having to take care of somebody that doesn't have a very good quality of life. That's really, really difficult. And sometimes we're selfish. Like, I want you to always be here, but it's more for me, not necessarily for you, because you wouldn't want me having to take care of you every day for the rest of your life, or whatever. But that's hard to, necessarily work through with family, because most of the time when we see them, we're seeing them in that super emotional state of, something that has just happened. And, and that's just hard. It's just hard for them to deal with. And it's hard for them to process all of those emotions, in a very short time frame.
Yeah. 3 weeks ago, my best friend, he and his brother are both deputy sheriffs in Oklahoma. And his brother, my best friend's brother, was giving mutual aid to Highway Patrol, who were working an accident on Interstate 40, and he was hit by a vehicle. And there was like 6 brain bleeds, broke his back, broke his neck, broke ribs, punctured his liver. I mean, just all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden we're having this conversation of, what is best here? And I will say, even the doctors were like, we don't think he's going to make it. I mean, they airlifted him to UAMS. And, but yesterday he walked out of the hospital.
Wow. So
we can't always say, that they may be better off. And so I just wanted to add that, since we're not in any position to say, hey, they're better off if they go ahead and go home to be with the Lord. Sure. That would be the appropriate response for any of us. We would all be better off to go home and be with the Lord, in this day of time. During COVID, we saw a lot of first responders get what we knew was always there, but it became more evident, called compassion fatigue. Did you experience that, or at the fire department, did you see that experienced in any way?
Yeah, man, COVID was that was a strange time. Just and I think the thing that was unique about it was, we've always talked about first world issues versus third world issues and all of those kind of things, but that was I want to say in my lifetime, that was the first time that I can really think about, like, the whole world, the entire world was going through the same issues at the same time. And, because you can look back at different points in history of, like, bad things happening, bombings or terrorism acts that have happened elsewhere. And, like, while your heart can still go out to people, unless you're involved in that, it's different. But we were all involved in that same point in time through, over the long period of time, going through and trying to figure out things at the same time. And so COVID was one of those strange times where I was actually working I was still working for Conway Fire Department. Then on my off days, I would work at Conway Regional in the ER. And it was just one of those times to where there was just so much uncertainty, and we wanted to act like we were making educated decisions on how to treat people and how to do things and what made things better, what made things worse. But like, if we were all being honest, everything was just trial and error, And so we would have ER doctors and nurses and technicians and respiratory therapists that were walking around in plastic gowns for 12 hours at a time with face mask on and goggles that you couldn't see what you're doing because everything was staying fogged up. You couldn't hardly breathe because your mask would, be constantly filled. And it was just one of those things to where everybody was just trying to do the best that they could, assuming that we were doing the best for everybody with the information we had at the time. But it just got to a point to where there was new information coming out constantly. And what we did yesterday was not the same thing we were doing today. And every hospital room was full. Every ER bed was full. All of our ambulance and fire department crews were, out doing all that they could do. And nobody really knew if what we were doing was even making a difference. That's at least how we felt. Mm-hmm. And so it absolutely became a point to where you just got just physically and mentally tired. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the compassion fatigue really set in, because not only it was your job to answer all the 911 calls and treat every person that walked into that ER like it was your own family, but then you also had like your actual family at home, and you would have to go to work when they were all sick, or you would have to go to work whenever, things were going on between, extended family and all the things. And it was just, you were just having to deal with so much just noise, and then put it on top of it was also a political year. And so you were hearing all the things. And so it did get to a point to where you were just like, there were certain words that I just didn't want to hear through the day, because you just got so tired of all the stuff. And then, like our nurses, and doctors and hospital staff just in general, I tell you, the thing that I noticed the most was the fact of like all the monitors beeping all the time. And you got to where you almost didn't hear it. Mm-hmm. Or if you did, I don't want to say we didn't care, because that's not true and that's not accurate. But it just got to where it was just everything was happening so much. It was just hard to keep up. Mm-hmm. And you did get to a point to where you felt like you were just kind of keeping your head above water. And I felt really bad for a lot of I called them baby nurses, like all of our nursing students that were coming into emergency medicine at that time, 6 months into being, out of school, and they were just frazzled, because they were just trying to learn how to do what they had been in school for years and years to do. They were just trying to learn that, and there was just so much being thrown on everybody. And so, compassion fatigue, it affected everybody in the first responder community.
Yeah. And I don't know about every state, but I know Arkansas kind of fast-tracked their nursing program during COVID and really threw a bunch of people into critical care, that had no business being there, but just because they needed warm bodies to do things. And the biggest thing of that was the political polarization of all of this, and people, I don't feel well, but I don't have COVID.
Right.
or I'm not getting the vaccine because that'll give me COVID. And I know that as a mental health professional, I got tired of hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
As a pastor, I got tired of hearing, that the vaccine was the mark of the beast. All of this kind of the crazy stuff that happened. And I think it affected everybody as far as this compassion fatigue of where we have given everything that we can, we just can't give any more because we're exhausted.
Yep.
Did you see any time and point in that where the compassion fatigue became dangerous?
Yeah, it now it kind of feels like history, but it still feels like you can remember all of those things just like it was yesterday.
Sure.
From a church standpoint of hearing the congregations argue about online versus, being in person and, all of the things, mask versus no mask, vaccines versus no vaccine, and seeing some of the best, I mean, like literally some of the best nurses that I knew, not just being good people, but also from a clinical side of things, being let go from hospitals because they wouldn't get the vaccine. And then, but yet we were totally fine with having a brand new out of school nurse being thrown in to a situation that they never should have been thrown into because they were willing to get a vaccine. And it just remembering like none of this makes sense, and I think that there are times to where through like looking back of we probably ruined and burn out some people that probably would have been really good long-term healthcare providers, whether that be from the emergency care side versus the clinical hospital side. We burned a lot of people out just because we put people in situations that they probably shouldn't have been in at such a point in time in their new career or whatever. There were times to where as they were fast tracking people through their training or through their schooling, they were taking down the hours of that they had to go through school or go through training, and just remembering going, I don't think this is a great idea, but at the same time, everything was in such chaos, not necessarily having a good plan of how to do it the right way, because everything was, we want to call everything was, scientifically based, but really everything was just so emotionally charged, and things were we were just running off of some facts versus some emotion and, calling it science. And, now looking back, we're like, a lot of the things I think cooler heads would have prevailed if we could have just been like, okay, this is,
Sure.
We've seen things before. Let's not make it political, and just, this is how things happen sometimes. And, but yeah, there's definitely, I don't know that I can say that I can look back at a time and said, somebody didn't get treated well, or we might have had a different outcome if they had had more time under their belt or whatever. Because one thing we did really well with is, especially on the clinical side and the emergency medicine side, is we would take somebody that was fairly new and we would make sure that they were with somebody who had some more experience or knowledge, and try to, give them some extra time to learn, even though it was on the job training. We didn't try to put people out there in an area where they weren't prepared or ready to be by themselves before. But I know that we definitely forced people into roles to get, kind of that burnout stage way quicker than they normally would have if we weren't in that particular situation at the time.
Yeah. And while all of that is happening, we either have family, friends, or some acquaintance that is dying or had died of COVID. And so it was a unique time, to say the least. So let's say you have a firefighter that is in emotional distress, not due to anything that's happening within work, but outside of work. How do you address that so that it doesn't affect their performance as a fireman?
So that is something that we have worked really hard on in probably I would say the last 10 years is realizing that all the things people deal with outside of work ends up affecting their work life also. And our profession is a little bit unique in the fact that like we go to work and we work a schedule called a 48-96. So we go to work for 48 hours. We go to the firehouse. We're there for 48 straight hours. And, our families are kind of left to deal with all the things that life happens for that 48 hours while we're kind of away. But we've tried to work really hard on getting to know our people in such a manner that whenever things aren't right, whether they're just not acting normal or they're not acting like themselves, and trying and instead of just the old school mechanism of just, hey, get over it, we all have jobs to do, you just got to get over it and move past it. Like, let's figure out if there's something we can do during this time frame to help you so that you can better perform at whatever level you need to perform while you're here. Because we also need guys, men and women that are in first responder communities. We need their marriages to be good. We need their mental health to be good. We need their kids to be in a good place, because when that's not happening, all of those things, you don't just shut that off and let it go whenever you walk through the doors of a firehouse or whenever you jump in your police car. Like, that stuff doesn't just stop affecting you.
Right.
And so the only way, in my thinking, the only way to really help that stuff is like we've got to start, and we have started working on how to make our people better on and off the job. And so, but yeah, that, the only way I know to really do that is you have to build relationships with your people that you work with every day, in the fact, to the extent of knowing their wives and their kids' names and what's going on in their lives and, things like that. Because whenever somebody walks through the door and he or she is not their normal self, most of the time we don't like to instantly just start talking about things that are going on in our lives. But you can tell that something's not kosher, something's not right. And, you can spark those conversations to get people to talking about those things. And sometimes you may not be able to change anything in that 48-hour period, but sometimes just getting them talking about situations can kind of help them start working through stuff and, at least make it to where they're okay to be in there while they're there.
Sure. I think that's good advice, though, for any organization, is to know your people so that you can, you can see, and if you really know their heart and how they receive, then you can see if something's going wrong, whether they're really trying to show it or not. So, trying to wrap this all up in a big, pretty bow, if Rick Stapleton had to look at a new recruit, whether it be fire, EMS, police, hospital, nurse, whatever that may be, what would the words of advice be compassed from your 19 years of experience to that person?
I think that man, there's so many thoughts going through your head, or going through my head. But I think that if you're doing it for the right reasons, and you don't let your ego get involved, and you're doing this because you love people and you want to help make somebody's day better, you've got to stay focused on that, and you've got to stay focused on why you initially got on the job, in whatever facet that is. Because at one point you thought that this was going to be the best job that you ever had in your entire life. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we let all the other junk kind of bog us down. But if you can stay focused on the fact that you really got into this profession because you loved people and you wanted to be able to help people, and that this job really isn't about you, it's really about other people, that helps keep things in perspective. You know, there's a lot of things we can't control, but we can control how we feel about our jobs. We can control how we feel about people. And so I think that if we can, just remember that we're ultimately here for everyone else, that really helps stay the course on that needs to be the focus. And that's probably what I would say. That would be my main, because everything else kind of falls into place after that, right?
Sure.
We always, ultimately, like we have to be able to provide a living for our families, or we're not going to be able to stay in this profession. We have to be able to take care of ourselves physically and mentally, or we're not going to be able to stay in this profession. We have to be able to do all the things, but ultimately, if you remember that we're not doing this for us, and if people are doing this like for selfish reasons, those are typically the ones that don't last, for a full career. And that's not saying not everybody's meant to do this.
Sure.
And it's hard because, like, I can remember whenever I was in my initial interview to get hired on, they're like, so do you think you're going to be a good fireman? Do you think this is what you really want to do for the rest of your life? And I was like, well, I've never done this before, but I think so. And so, it's just kind of one of those weird things that not everybody's meant to do it. But I think whenever you can keep your mindset focused on, you show up every day to do the best you can for other people having the worst day of their life. And you can keep that being your focus, I think you'll be successful in your career. That doesn't mean you're going to save everybody. Not everything's going to go right. But if you can keep that as being your focus, you're going to do a pretty good job by the people in your organization and by the people in the public that are looking at you to be their, Superman every time you show up, even though that's not the realization.
Right.
I think you'll find the successes that you need to in your career if you'll stay focused on the fact that this is always about somebody else.
Yeah. So what I hear is two things: remember your why, and trust the process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a much more eloquent way than what I said. But yes, that is absolutely correct.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, that is what. Yeah. Yes.
Well, Rick, thank you for being here today with us on Doc Talks. We appreciate your willingness not only to serve the city of Conway, but to share with us today.
Hey, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Well, thank you for listening to Doc Talks today. Again, you can find all of our information, all of our other shows at lifeword.org. We invite you to come and take a look at all the many different things that we have going on there. I'm Doc Bryan. You can find me at thedocbryan.com, and we look forward to seeing and hearing from you soon. Goodbye.